Kayla used my study guide to pass her Praxis exam. There are other preps to choose from, but take it from her, 240 is the best. She says that nothing was missing from our combo of videos and reading materials, and it helped her pass. My name is Scott Roselle, and I've helped thousands of teachers pass their Praxis reading exam. And today, I want to help you. This video is going to prepare you for the Praxis Teaching Reading K-12 exam. And in this video, we're going to cover 3 things. First, what's on the test and how to study for it. Second, the most likely concepts that will be on the test. And third, we're going to look at a few practice questions so you understand how the concepts are going to be reflected on the test. Now, the Teaching Reading K-12 exam consists of 6 content categories. Phonological and phonemic awareness, including emergent literacy. Phonics and decoding. Vocabulary and fluency. Comprehension of literacy and informational text. Writing and assessment and instructional decision making. The good news is categories 1 through 5 are already in the order that students typically follow in learning to read, so we'll go over those sequentially. They're each made up of multiple choice questions, with comprehension having a few more questions than the other categories. Now the last category is a bit tricky. It's 3 constructed response questions, or CRQs. Now these CRQs are brief essay-style questions that ask you to apply your knowledge of teaching reading from categories 1 through 5 to specific scenarios. Now, this CRQ portion accounts for 25% of your total score, and if the idea of essay-style questions scares you a little bit, you're not alone at all. It scares me to death. But I'm going to break them down for you, so you definitely want to keep watching towards the end, because the scariest part we're going to address last. Let's jump into the first category, phonological and phonemic awareness, including emergent literacy. That's a mouthful. It's a few different topics wrapped up in one category, but basically this is where students build the foundation for learning to read. Let's take a look at what you're most likely going to need to know. You'll need to be sure you know the difference between phonological awareness and phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is essentially a subcategory of phonological awareness. Now, phonological awareness, the bigger category, encompasses the ability to recognize individual phonemes, syllables, and words. Phonemic awareness is the ability to hear and use individual units of sounds, or phonemes. Thus, phonological big, phoneme small. On the exam, you're going to be asked some strategies you can use to teach phonological and phonemic awareness skills. So if you need a whole bunch of ideas, our study guide has some phenomenal strategies, and you can find it in the link below. As students develop their oral language, it's important to show them how the printed words and the spoken language are related. So be ready to identify some techniques to help early readers learn letter names and sounds, like the reading alphabet books, or some multisensory methods like making letters with Play-Doh or tracing them with their finger. Remember that the students need to say the name or the sound of the letter while they're forming it in order to learn it, because it helps with the cognitive recognition and the development of the student. Okay, now we've got the foundation. Let's see what students are ready to learn next. The second category is phonics and decoding. This is when we get into the nitty-gritty of exactly how to teach kids to read words on their own. Phonics is all about connecting the sounds of language, phonemes, to their written symbols, graphemes. In addition to teaching your students single letter consonant and vowel sounds, you'll need to be familiar with some more advanced phonics patterns. Here are some essential patterns to know in order of increasing complexity with some examples. Consonant blends, consonant digraphs, silent E, vowel digraphs, and diphthongs. I know, it's a funny name, but they're important to know. Diphthongs are unique vowel sounds. Now, let's take an example. In coin, C-O-I-N, the O and the I come together to make a sound unlike any short or long I or O. The sound is a diphthong. The letters are a digraph. The same vowel combination can be considered both a vowel digraph and a vowel diphthong. So pay close attention to how your questions about these diphthongs are phrased. And be familiar with R-controlled vowels and inflectional endings. Also, be prepared to identify appropriate strategies for teaching different phonics patterns. A great one is word sorts. You can use word sorts to focus on certain patterns and help students recognize and differentiate between them. You may even get a question with a sample word sort asking you to identify what pattern the student's working on or which is sorted incorrectly. You'll likely see a few questions about syllabication. Students move from reading monosyllabic or one-syllable words to multisyllabic words. You'll need to be able to identify types of syllables and how to help students tackle them. Here are the 6 types of syllables with examples: closed, open, vowel consonant E, vowel team, digraphs and diphthongs, final stable, and R controlled. If you need more help with this stuff, check out our study guides. This is a lot, but we made it. Are you ready to go to the next category?
Yeah.
That's the answer. The next category we'll go over is vocabulary and fluency. Now let's start with vocabulary. In order for students to progress as readers, it's important that they understand the meaning of the words they're reading. Lots of vocabulary is learned indirectly, but you'll need to teach some words directly, especially those words that are more academic in nature. You'll need to know some methods for teaching new vocabulary. A great example is the Freyer model, which has 4 boxes to organize information about the word. The key is actively engaging students with the word, not just having them copy a definition. You'll also need to be aware of how to teach your students to figure out the meaning of an unknown word that they come across while reading. The most common method you'll see will be morphemic analysis, which also might be called structural analysis or simply word analysis. Morphemic analysis refers to the process of breaking down words into meaningful parts, or morphemes, to determine what these parts mean and putting them back together to determine the meaning of the whole word. For example, on your exam, you might be asked to select a word that morphemic analysis would work on. Let's make it a fun one. On which word could you use morphemic analysis? Coffee, early, decaffeinated, drowsy. The answer is decaffeinated, because you can break the word into the prefix de, the root caffeine, and the suffix ate to understand that it means this coffee better have caffeine in it so I can finish this video.
Order up for Scott.
All right, let's bring it back in. We need to cover the other part of this category, which is fluency. The biggest thing to know is that fluency is made up of 3 components: accuracy, prosody, and speed. And you'll need to know some strategies for supporting fluent reading. The right methods is really going to depend on which component of fluency a student's struggling with, but in general, it's important to make sure that they're reading at their current level and that they have lots of opportunities to read out loud. Repeat, lots of opportunities to read out loud. You can even let students record their reading and listen to themselves. So we went over some of the most important aspects of vocabulary and fluency, and remember, we're going to cover some of these as practice questions in the end. But really, to have the confidence you deserve, subscribe to our 240 study guide. Just click the link below. Now it's time for category 4, comprehension of literary and informational text. Remember, this one's a little bigger than the other multiple choice categories, so it's very important to focus in and really understand what's going on. Because in this category, students move from learning to read to reading to learn. You'll need to know the difference between literal, inferential, and evaluative comprehension, and you'll need to be able to recognize which strategies or types of questioning is best to develop each kind of comprehension in students. To build literal comprehension, work on things like summarizing and identifying the plot elements, like setting. For inferential comprehension, help students recognize the cause and effect relationships and to make predictions. To develop evaluative comprehension, model metacognition and help students make opinions about the text. For comprehension, remember to avoid any distractions. You'll probably see a couple questions about informational text or nonfiction text. In questions about this genre, correct answers often involve text features, including the table of contents, headings, charts, graphs, diagrams, index, and glossary. Teaching students how to preview and use these features will help them comprehend informational text. It's important to understand how to continue developing students' comprehension at the secondary level. You'll likely have some questions about genre structures. Here are some common ones to be familiar with: poetry, drama, myth, folktale, biography, and finally, how-to. You may also be asked a question about teaching literary devices. So, you'll need to know which literary devices are likely to come up on the test. It's things like imagery, metaphor, simile, diction, tone, symbolism, repetition, 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 repetition. Setting, point of view. The key is teaching students to recognize the devices, then they can move in discussing why they think the author used the device. Hopefully you comprehended all that stuff about comprehension, but if you need more practice, again, stay put because we'll do practice questions at the end. And if you really want a deep dive, get the 240 study guide. The fifth category is writing. Now you might be wondering, why is there a writing section on a reading test? Well, writing is an essential component of reading instruction. It's on the exam because reading and writing are so closely related. You'll need to know the steps or the stages of the writing process and how to teach them. The stages of the writing process are pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing, and publishing. Teachers should provide direct instruction for each phase of the writing process, and you should be familiar with these methods. The first one's modeling. This is where students benefit from seeing you work through each stage of the writing process. The second one's guided writing. Now this is similar to guided reading, where the teacher provides specific writing instruction and feedback in a small group setting. And then finally, conferencing. Now this can be either done with the teacher or with a peer. The Teaching Reading K-12 exam also covers the use of digital tools for collaboration and research. So you need to be ready to identify ways to help students select reliable sources of information and collaborate with their peers during the writing process. An example would be using Google Docs so that students can comment on or edit the same doc at the same time. You may see a couple questions about teaching spelling and grammar. It's a good idea to review the stages of spelling development and know how to support students in each stage. If you need to brush up on that, use the 240 study guide. It'll save you a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of worry because you're guaranteed to pass your test when you use it. We've made it to the last category. The final category is assessment and instructional decision making. Remember, this is the one with the constructed response questions, or CRQs. This is where you're going to write out your answers to the question, and it's worth 25% of your total score. Now, I know written response questions can sometimes be intimidating. Trust me, if you know the other 5 categories, you have all the knowledge you need to conquer this category. This gives you the chance to show off everything that you already know. Now you're going to have 3 questions. They'll involve supporting elementary or secondary literacy learners within one of the areas that we've discussed, or supporting diverse learners such as English language learners or students with disabilities. Each constructed response question gives you a scenario, some sort of teaching situation, to read and then consider, and then it gives you a list of certain tasks, and these are the issues that you're going to write about. Now, to really know what I'm talking about and how it all makes sense, we're going to jump into a CRQ from one of our study guides. Here's the scenario. Miss Johnson's 5th grade class is taking part in an integrated social studies and reading lesson. Her class is an inclusion class with 4 students identified as having a learning disability and is prescribed an individual education program, or an IEP. With a partner, students are asked to read an assigned article on the American Civil War, record the definitions of the assigned vocabulary words in a graphic organizer, and then summarize the article in a sentence strip. Okay, so it's a 5th grade class working on vocabulary and an informational text. And we've got a small group of students with IEPs. Here are your tasks. Identify and explain one strategy the teacher could use to teach unfamiliar vocabulary words to the entire class. Next, identify 2 strategies or supports Ms. Johnson can utilize to assist a student that has a learning disability in completing this assignment. And you need to explain the benefit of each strategy. We suggest writing 1 or 2 paragraphs for each task. Now the key is to be concise and get right to the point because you'll only have a few minutes for each one. Task 1 asks us to come up with a strategy to teach unfamiliar words to the whole class. There's not just one correct answer here. There are several strategies you could pick, but here's an example of a strong response. We can build background knowledge using pictures and video clips. See how I give specific examples there? Task 2 asks us to give 2 strategies to help the students with learning disabilities and explain the benefit of each. Here's a great sample response. First, we can reduce the number of words these students will need to put in their graphic organizer. And then second, we can use highlighting to help them focus on context clues and summarizing. Now, I want you to notice how we included a sentence or 2 about the benefit of each strategy. Now, we have got a lot more CRQs like this in our Praxis Teaching Reading Study Guide, including high and low responses for you to review and compare. That way you know what a good response is and what a bad response is. Now that we've gone over some of the big concepts in our 6 categories, and we practice answering a question from that big, ugly Category 6, let's look at some practice multiple choice questions from those categories 1 through 5 that I kept promising to show you how those concepts can appear on the test. If you want a lot more practice questions, you can click the free practice test below, and at the end of that practice test, you get a score report of how well you did on the test. You can then subscribe to our 240 study guide and get all the practice questions you need to be 100% confident for the test, and then your studying is also going to be guided by that score report, so you're doing very efficient studying. Remember the big ideas from Category 1, or phonological and phonemic awareness. Let's see how those concepts are going to come up on the test. A teacher divides her class into groups and asks the students to work together to identify the last sound in each group member's name. What skill has the teacher asked her students to practice? Phoneme segmentation, syllable segmentation, phoneme blending, decoding. The question feedback we give in our study guide could tell me that they are practicing phoneme segmentation because the students are starting with the whole name and attempting to break apart the sounds in order to identify the last sound. So this is the correct answer. Now let's look at a question under Category 2, Phonics and Decoding. A first grade teacher builds upon the phonics foundations already established in kindergarten. Since students progress at different rates, instruction will need to be differentiated to meet individual students' needs. Based on the progression of decoding skills, which of the following groups of words will be taught last? Toy, pout, clown. Shop, chunk, ding. Hat, gap, knot. Hate, pole, while. Vowel digraphs and diphthongs are the most complex monosyllabic decoding stage prior to beginning multi-syllable words. What about those vocabulary and fluency questions? What do those look like? When choosing vocabulary words for his 5th grade students, a teacher has been purposefully selecting academic and high-frequency words. He already has various strategies and routine activities in place to facilitate the use of and interaction with high-frequency words. He is now focused on expanding his students' experience with the academic vocabulary specifically. Which of the following would best support this goal? Completing word searches that include new academic vocabulary, requiring the students to use the new academic vocabulary in their journal writing, requiring students to use the new academic vocabulary outside of school a certain number of times, deliberately using the new academic vocabulary terms in questions and activities outside of reading instruction. This is the correct answer. Reinforcing these terms across different content areas will expose them to the words in a new setting and increase the likelihood that they will remember the words, their meaning, and how to use them in a sentence. I didn't forget about comprehension. Let's see what one of those questions might look like. A high school student is writing a research paper on blue whales, and the teacher has provided him with a book entitled The Encyclopedia of Marine Life. Which of the following text features should the student utilize to locate the information he needs for his paper? The glossary? The photo caption? The index of the book? The subheadings? This is the correct answer. The index of the book will assist the student with writing the paper because the index will show all the instances in which the text in which blue whale is mentioned. Now for the last category, writing. A 3rd grade class is beginning the writing process for a persuasive unit. Which of the following lesson topics would be most applicable for the pre-writing stage of the writing process? Determining audience, transition sentence, punctuation of compound sentences, sensory language? This is the correct answer. This is an important part of the pre-writing stage because it can influence how an argument is framed and which evidence is most impactful. Now, that's just a tiny sliver of practice questions to give you an idea about how these concepts are assessed on the test. Congratulations on finishing the video! If you found this helpful, please give it a like, make a comment, let us know what your favorite part was. And did you know that thousands of teachers just like you have passed their certification test using 240 study guides? If you really want to make sure you're prepared for your Praxis Teaching Reading 5206 exam, another mouthful, take the next step and subscribe to the 240 guide. Do yourself a favor, invest in your career. It has hours of videos so you can watch and listen while doing chores. It has test-aligned content so you know precisely what you need to study. And it has hundreds of authentic practice questions so you can be sure you're ready. And I'm so confident that we have a money-back guarantee. So click the link below right now to get started.